Given your parameters, the most logical setting is the Arizona Territory. United States, during the late 1800s, Old West era. This region had significant Apache presence and frequent tensions between Apache communities and white settlers, military forces, making it the perfect backdrop for this narrative. Target audience: English-speaking viewers interested in Old West history, indigenous perspectives, and medical drama with moral complexity. Historical context: I'll set this around 1880 to 1885, when Apache resistance was still active, reservations were being established, and diseases like typhoid, cholera, or smallpox frequently devastated frontier communities. Now, I'll create your 7,000-word story in pure narrative form, with no chapter titles or epilogues, just the story as it will be narrated. The summer of 1883 arrived in southern Arizona Territory with a heat that seemed to press down from the sky like a heavy hand. The town of Copper Springs had grown rapidly over the past 5 years, swelling from a mining camp of 40 souls to a bustling settlement of nearly 300. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their fresh paint already blistering under the relentless sun. The Silver Star Saloon stood at one end, the marshal's office at the other, and between them spread the hopeful infrastructure of a town that believed its future was written in the copper veins running through the surrounding hills. Dr. Marcus Holloway had arrived in Copper Springs 18 months earlier, bringing with him medical training from Philadelphia and an earnest belief that civilization could be planted even in this harsh soil. He was 32 years old, lean and serious, with hands that trembled slightly when he was tired, a remnant of too many nights assisting in surgery during his training. His office occupied a small building next to the general store, and he'd grown accustomed to treating mining injuries, snake bites, and the occasional gunshot wound. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what began on the 15th of July. The first patient was a miner named Thomas Beck. He arrived at Holloway's office just after dawn, supported by 2 fellow workers who were clearly frightened. Beck's face was flushed with fever, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Dark spots had begun to appear on his neck and chest, and he complained of agonizing pain in his joints. "How long has he been like this?" Holloway asked, helping the men lower Beck onto the examination table. "Started yesterday evening," one of them replied. "Thought it was just the heat at first, but then the spots came, and he started talking out of his head." Holloway examined Beck carefully, noting the rapid pulse, the burning fever that seemed to radiate from the man's skin, and the peculiar rash that was spreading across his torso. It didn't match smallpox, which he'd seen during an outbreak in Pennsylvania. It wasn't cholera or typhoid. The symptoms were wrong. This was something else entirely. "Get him to his boarding house," Holloway instructed. "Keep him isolated and comfortable. I'll come by later with medicine." But the medicine he tried, quinine, laudanum, cold compresses, did nothing. By evening, Beck was delirious, his fever climbing to dangerous levels, and by the next morning, 3 more cases had appeared. Within a week, Copper Springs was gripped by terror. The disease spread with horrifying speed, moving from the mining camps into the town proper. It seemed to respect no boundaries of class or circumstance. The banker's wife fell ill on the same day as 2 prostitutes from the saloon. The blacksmith's young son developed symptoms hours after the elderly widow who ran the boarding house. Holloway worked without rest, moving from house to house, but he was fighting an enemy he couldn't identify or understand. The mortality rate was devastating. Roughly half of those who contracted the disease died within 5 days. The rest recovered slowly, weakened and scarred. The doctor's careful notes documented symptoms but offered no insights into treatment. Every remedy he tried failed. By the end of the second week, 37 people had died. The town's small cemetery expanded rapidly, fresh graves appearing each morning. Marshal Wade Tucker ordered a quarantine, stationing deputies at both ends of town to prevent anyone from leaving. It was a desperate measure, and everyone knew it was probably too late. The disease had likely already spread to neighboring settlements. The telegram Holloway sent to the territorial capital in Prescott brought a response that offered little hope. Similar outbreaks reported in 3 other settlements. No effective treatment identified. Recommend quarantine and prayer. On a Wednesday evening, as Holloway sat in his office reviewing his notes for the 100th time, Marshal Tucker appeared at his door. The marshal was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with a thick moustache and eyes that had seen too much violence. He'd maintained order during the crisis, with a combination of authority and compassion, but Holloway could see the strain wearing on him. "Doc, we need to talk," Tucker said, removing his hat. "People are getting desperate. There's talk of burning down the quarantine barricades and making a run for it." "That would only spread the disease further," Holloway replied, rubbing his eyes. "How many new cases today?" 6. And we lost 4 more. Sarah Churn, the laundress. Big Pete from the mine. The Garrett twins. Tucker paused. "Doc, people are starting to say things." "What kind of things?" "About the Apache. About how this sickness started right after that incident at the reservation last month." Holloway looked up sharply. He'd heard rumors about a confrontation between cavalry troops and Apache families. Something about disputed water rights and crops destroyed. But he'd been too focused on his medical practice to pay much attention to the ongoing tensions between the military and the indigenous population. "That's superstition talking," Holloway said. "Disease doesn't work that way. This is some kind of contagion, probably waterborne or transmitted through close contact." "Maybe so," Tucker said. "But here's the thing. The Apache camps to the east haven't reported any cases. Not one. And their scouts come through here regular enough. Why aren't they getting sick?" It was a good question, one Holloway hadn't considered. The Apache communities in the region had complex relationships with the white settlements, sometimes trading, sometimes clashing, always maintaining a careful distance. But if this disease was as contagious as it appeared, why hadn't it spread to them? "Could be they're isolated enough," Holloway suggested. "Or maybe they've encountered something similar before and have some natural resistance. Or maybe," Tucker said slowly, "they know something we don't." The idea seemed far-fetched, but Holloway was desperate enough to consider anything. "What are you suggesting?" "There's a woman, Apache healer. It goes by the name Dokia. Some of the older settlers have mentioned her, saying she's got knowledge of plants and medicines that go back generations. She lives up in the Canyon country, about 10 miles northeast. A medicine woman." Holloway felt his professional skepticism rising. "Marshal, I'm a trained physician. I can't abandon scientific medicine for folk remedies." "Your scientific medicine isn't working, Doc," Tucker said bluntly. "I've got a town dying by inches. If there's even a chance this woman knows something useful, I'm willing to try it." Holloway wanted to argue, but the marshal was right. He thought of Thomas Beck, the first victim, and of the Garrett twins, only 6 years old, buried that afternoon. He thought of his Hippocratic oath, his duty to preserve life above all else. "Even if I agreed," Holloway said, "why would she help us? The Apache have little reason to love this town. We're sitting on land that was theirs, using water they need. That's what worries me, Tucker admitted. But I figure it's worth asking. Will you come with me? Tomorrow at first light? Holloway nodded slowly. I'll come, but I'm bringing my medical bag. Whatever she knows, I want to understand it scientifically. They rode out the next morning, just the two of them. Tucker had suggested a larger party, but Holloway argued that approaching with armed men would guarantee rejection. The land they traveled through was austere and beautiful, red rock formations rising against the endless blue sky, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, the occasional hawk circling overhead. After 3 hours of riding, they entered a canyon where a thin stream ran between rocky walls. Tucker led them to a place where the canyon widened, revealing a small camp sheltered beneath an overhanging cliff. 3 traditional wickiups stood there, and a woman emerged from one of them as they approached. Doyle was perhaps 50 years old, though Holloway found it hard to judge. Her face was weathered by sun and wind, her black hair streaked with gray and bound back simply. She wore traditional Apache clothing, and her dark eyes assessed them with an intelligence that was immediately apparent. She showed no fear, though 2 white men approaching her camp unannounced could have meant danger. Tucker dismounted and spoke in halting Apache, clearly struggling with the language. The woman responded in English, her accent strong but her words clear. I know why you have come. The sickness in your town. Holloway dismounted as well, surprised. You know about it. We know many things the white men do not notice. We know when the deer change their paths. We know when the water becomes bitter. We know when sickness walks among your people. Her gaze moved between them. Why should I help those who drove my people from the Valley of the Good Springs? Who killed my nephew because he was hunting on land his grandfather's grandfather knew as home? The directness of her words hit Holloway harder than he expected. He thought of the town, of its proud buildings and busy streets, and realized he'd never once considered whose absence had made room for its existence. Because people are dying, he said simply. Children, old people. They didn't choose where this town was built. They were just trying to live. As we were trying to live, Docker said, before the soldiers came, before the treaties that were not honored, before the reservation where the land is bad and the water scarce. Tucker spoke up. Ma'am, I know there's been wrongs done. I know it, and I'm not here to make excuses for it. But right now, we've got families being torn apart by something we can't fight. If you know anything at all that could help, I'm asking you to share it. Dokia was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, Come, sit. We will talk. She led them to a fire circle outside her wickiup, where they sat cross-legged on woven mats. She prepared a tea from herbs Hollow and didn't recognize, serving it in clay cups. The ritual felt important somehow, an acknowledgement of hospitality and negotiation. The sickness you describe, I know it, Dokia said. It is old. My grandmother's grandmother spoke of it. It came when I was a young woman, brought by traders from the south. Many of my people died before we learned how to fight it. You have a cure. Holloway leaned forward, his medical training warring with his desire to believe. Not a cure that works after the sickness has taken hold, she said, but a prevention. A medicine made from plants that grow in the high desert, prepared in a certain way. Those who take it before the sickness comes, or in its earliest days, will not die. They may sicken, but they will live. How does it work? Holloway asked. What's the mechanism? Dakia looked at him with something that might have been amusement. Your people always want to take things apart to understand them. My people learnt by watching, by trying, by remembering what worked. I cannot tell you how it works in the way you want to know. I can tell you that it does work. I'd need to see the formula, Holloway said. The ingredients, the preparation method. I'd need to document it, test it. You have no time for testing, Dockier interrupted. How many die in your town each day? Yesterday, 4, Tucker said quietly. Day before, 6. Then you do not have time for your tests and documents. You must trust or you must bury your dead. The words hung in the air. Holloway wanted to protest, to insist on scientific rigor, but she was right. They were out of time. Still, something held him back. A lifetime of training that warned against unverified treatments. What do you want in exchange? Tucker asked. We'll pay. Gold, supplies, whatever you need. Dockier shook her head. I do not want gold. She stood and walked to the edge of the camp, looking out over the canyon. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made Holloway's chest tighten. 3 months ago, soldiers came to the winter camp at Red Creek. They said we were off the reservation, though we were on land the treaty gave us. They said we had stolen cattle, though we had not. They burned our shelters. They shot my sister's son when he tried to protect the food stores. He was 16 years old. She turned back to face them. His name was Nate. He wanted to be a runner, like his father. Now he's bones in the ground. Tucker's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. I heard about that. It was 3rd Cavalry, under Captain Morrison. I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry does not bring back the dead, Dockier said. But justice might give his spirit rest. What kind of justice? Holloway asked, though he was beginning to understand. Captain Morrison walks free. He claims he followed orders, that he acted within his authority. But I know them. Truth, he wanted our land for his friend who runs cattle. He manufactured the accusation. He chose violence when none was needed. Her eyes locked on Tucker's. I will give you the medicine to save your town. I will show you how to prepare it and how to use it. But in exchange, you will bring Captain Morrison to justice. Not your justice, which is words and paper and men who were not there deciding what is true. Real justice. He must stand before the territorial governor. He must speak the truth of what he did. And he must be punished according to your own laws for murder. The silence that followed was profound. Holloway looked at Tucker and saw the marshal calculating odds, considering consequences. Accusing a cavalry officer of murder would bring down a storm of military and political pressure. It would require testimony, evidence, the courage to stand against the institution that supposedly kept the peace in the territory. I'm a town marshal, Tucker said slowly. I don't have jurisdiction over military matters. Then find someone who does, Dockier said, or bury your people. The choice is yours. Holloway felt torn. As a doctor, his obligation was to his patients, to the preservation of life. But what Dockier was asking would require Marshal Tucker to risk his career, possibly his life. It would require them to wade into the murky waters of territorial politics and military justice. Even if we agree, Holloway said, this could take months. Legal proceedings, investigations. People will die before we can. I will give you enough medicine for your town now, Dockier interrupted. I will show you where the plants grow and how to prepare more. But if Captain Morrison does not face justice, I will tell no other white settlements how to fight this sickness. It has spread already, yes, to other towns. Without my knowledge, they will die as yours has died. It was blackmail, pure and simple. But Holloway couldn't entirely blame her. How many times had her people been promised justice, only to see those promises broken? How many crimes against them had gone unpunished, dismissed as necessary for progress or safety? Tucker stood, walking a few paces away to think. Holloway watched him, understanding the terrible weight of the decision. Save the town, but compromise his principles and risk his career, or refuse and watch more people die. Finally, Tucker turned back. I'll do it. I'll contact the territorial governor directly, provide testimony about what I've heard regarding Red Creek. I'll push for an investigation. But I can't guarantee the outcome. I do not ask for guarantees, Tucker said. I ask for the attempt, for the truth to be spoken in a place where it matters. Your people believe in law, in courts, in justice written down. I am asking you to make those things real, not just words you use when convenient. I'll need witnesses, Tucker said. People who were at Red Creek. Your people don't trust white officials, and I don't blame them. But without testimony, I will provide witnesses, Dokia said. If you provide protection, can you promise that? Tucker hesitated, then nodded. On my word, as Marshal. Anyone who testifies will have protection. I'll make it official, in writing. Dokia studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Come, I will show you the medicine. She led them to a small garden area behind the wickiups, where various plants grew in careful rows. She pointed to a low-growing plant with silver-green leaves and small yellow flowers. This one, and this. She indicated 2 other plants. They must be harvested at dawn, when the dew is still on them. The roots of this one, the leaves of these 2. They must be dried for exactly 3 days in shade, then ground together with water from a flowing stream, not standing water. The mixture must be boiled until it reduces by half, then cooled. Each sick person takes 3 swallows, once at dawn, once at midday, once at dusk, for 5 days. Holloway pulled out a notebook, sketching the plants and writing down her instructions. His scientific mind catalogued details, leaf shapes, flower structures, growth patterns. Some part of him was already thinking about how to classify these botanically, how to identify their active compounds. You can take plants from here to start, Dokia said, but I will show you where they grow wild, so you can harvest more. This sickness may return. You must know how to prepare for it. Over the next 2 hours, she led them through the canyon and up into the higher desert, pointing out the plants growing in specific conditions, always near water, always in partial shade, always in soil with a particular reddish color. Holloway took more notes, collecting samples with Dokia's permission. As a physician, he was fascinated despite himself. The specificity of her knowledge, passed down from generations, represented a form of empirical medicine that predated formal medical training by centuries. By the time they prepared to leave, the sun was high overhead. Dokia gave them a clay jar containing enough prepared medicine for perhaps 20 doses. Start with those who are newly sick, she instructed. They have the best chance. The others, ... She shook her head. For them, give what comfort you can. The medicine may help some, but many are already too far gone. Thank you, Holloway said, and meant it. You're saving lives. I am demanding payment for saving lives, Dokia corrected. Do not make me into something noble. I do this for Nate. I do this so that his death means something, so that perhaps the next young man will not be shot for defending his family's food. Tucker met her eyes. I'll keep my word. You have my promise. Promises are wind, Dokia said. Actions are stone. Show me stone, Marshal Tucker. They rode back to Copper Springs, the precious jar of medicine wrapped carefully in Tucker's saddlebag. On the journey they barely spoke, each man wrestling with his own thoughts. Holloway kept reviewing Dokia's instructions, committing them to memory. Tucker's face was set in grim lines, already planning how to approach the territorial governor with an accusation against a military officer. They reached town as the sun was setting, its last light painting the buildings in shades of gold and red. Despite the beauty of the light, the town felt like a mausoleum. The streets were empty, except for a few figures, hurrying between buildings, faces covered with cloth in a futile attempt to ward off contagion. Holloway went directly to his office, where 6 people waited, new cases, all showing early symptoms. He prepared the first doses of Dockia's medicine, according to her instructions, diluting the concentrate with clean water and administering it to each patient. They looked at him with desperate hope, willing to try anything. "Take this 3 times a day for 5 days, he told each of them, echoing Dockia's words. Dawn, midday, and dusk. Don't skip a dose. Over the next 24 hours, Holloway moved through the town like a man possessed, administering the medicine to every patient he could reach. He started with the newest cases, those who'd shown symptoms for less than 2 days, as Dockia had instructed. He documented everything meticulously, who received the medicine, when, how far their symptoms had progressed. The results began to appear within 36 hours. The newly infected patients showed improvement, first fevers dropping, rashes fading, the terrible joint pain easing. Those who'd been sick longer showed more variable results, but even among them, the mortality rate dropped dramatically. Of the 20 patients who received the medicine in their first 2 days of illness, all 20 survived. Of the 15 who received it later, 11 survived. Still a marked improvement over the 50% mortality rate they'd been seeing. Word spread through Copper Springs like wildfire. The Apache woman's medicine worked. People began calling it a miracle, proof of divine intervention. Holloway tried to temper their expectations, explaining that some would still die, that the medicine wasn't perfect. But the change in atmosphere was palpable. Fear began to give way to hope. A week after his meeting with Dockia, Holloway led a party of healthy volunteers back into the canyon to harvest more of the medicinal plants. Dockia met them without surprise, as if she'd known they would come. She supervised the harvest, ensuring they took only what was needed and left enough for the plants to regenerate. She showed them how to prepare the medicine in large batches, how to store it properly, how to recognize when it had spoiled. "The sickness has reached the town called Silver Ridge," she told Holloway as they worked. 30 miles west of here. They will need this medicine too. "How do you know that?" Holloway asked. "We watch. We listen. We know what happens in this land, even when you do not see us." She paused in her work, fixing him with a steady gaze. "Will you share this medicine with them?" "Of course," Holloway said. "I took an oath to preserve life. I can't withhold treatment. Even though they did not pay the price I demanded. Even though they made no promises of justice." Holloway stopped, understanding the test. That's not how medicine should work. People shouldn't have to prove they're worthy of healing, and yet my people must constantly prove we are worthy of the land we've lived on for generations. Must prove we are worthy of treaties being honored. Must prove we are worthy of not being shot for hunting rabbits. Her voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "Your medicine, doctor, is built on the idea that all lives have value. But your society acts as if only some lives matter. Do you see the contradiction?" He did see it, and it made him deeply uncomfortable. "I'm not defending what's been done to your people," he said quietly, "and just saying that healing shouldn't be conditional." "Then you understand why I made it conditional now," Dockia said, "because sometimes the only way to make people see injustice is to make them feel its cost. You would have ridden away from my camp, back to your comfortable life, and never thought twice about Nate if his death had not stood between you and what you needed." She was right, and Holloway knew it. He had lived in Arizona territory for over a year, and had never once questioned the broader context of the Apache's situation. He'd been too focused on his own work, his own patients, his own concerns. Has Marshal Tucker contacted the governor? Docquier asked. He has. He sent a detailed letter 3 days ago, along with his formal testimony about what he's heard regarding the incident at Red Creek. He's requested an official investigation. Words on paper, Docquier said, but there was less dismissiveness in her tone than before. We will see if they become action. In fact, Tucker's letter had already set events in motion. The territorial governor, John Fremont, was a complicated man, a former general with political ambitions who understood both the importance of military relations and the growing national attention on the treatment of indigenous peoples. A scandal involving an unprovoked attack on Apache families could damage his reputation, but so could being seen as soft on maintaining order. 2 weeks after Tucker sent his letter, a territorial investigator arrived in Copper Springs. His name was Robert Carlson, a former Pinkerton detective now employed by the territorial government. He was a methodical man in his 40s, with a lawyer's precision and a detective's skepticism. Tucker met with Carlson in the marshal's office, laying out everything he knew about the Red Creek incident. Carlson listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. "These are serious accusations, Marshal Carlson," said when Tucker finished, accusing a cavalry officer of murder and misconduct. "You understand that Captain Morrison has an exemplary service record, that he's been commended for his work securing this territory." "I understand that," Tucker said. "I also understand that exemplary service records don't make a man incapable of wrongdoing. I've known good men who did bad things, and bad men who occasionally did good things. What matters is what actually happened at Red Creek, and you weren't there," Carlson pointed out. "No, but I can provide witnesses who were. Apache witnesses who are willing to testify under protection." Carlson's eyebrows rose. "The Apache rarely cooperate with territorial authorities. How did you secure their agreement?" Tucker considered his answer carefully. The full truth that their cooperation was payment for medicine that saved Copper Springs would complicate matters legally. "Instead," he said, "I gave them my word that they'd be protected if they testified, that their voices would be heard in a real legal proceeding, not dismissed because of their race. That's quite a promise, Marshal. The legal system doesn't always work as ideally as we'd like." "Then it should," Tucker said flatly. "If our laws don't apply equally, what good are they?" Over the following week, Carlson interviewed witnesses. Tucker arranged for 3 Apache men and 2 women who'd been at Red Creek to meet with the investigator in a neutral location, the old mission church 10 miles outside town, now abandoned but still structurally sound. Docquier came as well, serving as translator for those whose English was limited. Carlson listened to accounts of the cavalry arriving without warning, of Captain Morrison immediately adopting an aggressive posture, of soldiers searching wiki-ups and destroying food stores. He heard about the cattle that were supposedly stolen cattle that none of the Apache had seen, that may never have existed. He heard about Nate attempting to pull a soldier away from his grandmother's shelter, being shot in the chest at close range. Captain Morrison said the young man was armed and threatening, Carlson noted. He had a knife on his belt, one of the witnesses said through Docquier's translation. "Every man carries a knife." He did not draw it. He used only his hands, pushing the soldier who was being rough with an old woman. The soldier shot him. Captain Morrison watched and did nothing to stop it. Then he ordered, "Everyone leave, to return to the reservation, or the next one to die would be a woman." Carlson filled pages in his journal. Holloway, present as an observer at Tucker's request, watched the investigator's face for signs of bias or dismissal. But Carlson seemed genuinely interested in establishing facts, asking specific questions, probing for details that could be corroborated. After the interviews, Carlson spoke privately with Tucker and Holloway. "These testimonies are consistent and detailed," he said. "If accurate, they suggest serious misconduct at minimum, potentially criminal behavior. But you understand the challenges we face. Captain Morrison will claim he was maintaining order, following procedure. The military will close ranks around him. Even if I recommend prosecution, getting it through the territorial courts will be difficult." "But possible," Tucker pressed. "Possible," Carlson agreed. "Governor Fremont is under pressure from Eastern newspapers that have been critical of Indian policy. He may see this as an opportunity to demonstrate fairness, but Morrison has powerful friends, officers, businessmen, politicians. They'll fight back. Let them fight," Tucker said. Truth should mean something. The investigation stretched into its second month. During that time, the plague that had struck Copper Springs burned itself out, contained by quarantine and treated with Dockia's medicine. The final death toll was 63, terrible, but far less than the hundreds that might have died without intervention. Other towns in the territory sent representatives to Copper Springs, seeking the medicine formula. Holloway shared it freely, though he always explained its Apache origin and Dockia's role. Some received this information with gratitude. Others responded with suspicion or dismissal, uncomfortable with the idea of owing their survival to indigenous knowledge. Holloway found himself in the strange position of defending not just the medicine's efficacy, but the legitimacy of Docker's expertise. It frustrated him, the refusal to acknowledge that knowledge could come from sources outside formal European education. In late September, Carlson returned to Copper Springs with news. "Governor Fremont has agreed to a formal hearing," he announced. "Captain Morrison will be required to appear before a territorial judge to answer questions about the Red Creek incident. It's not a full trial yet, but it's a significant step." "Will the Apache witnesses be heard?" Tucker asked. "Yes. Their testimonies will be part of the official record." Carlson paused. "I'll be honest with you, Marshal. This is further than I expected to get. The military initially refused to cooperate, but pressure from the governor's office changed their position. Morrison's been temporarily relieved of field command pending the hearing. Tucker rode out to Dockia's camp to deliver the news personally. She received it with a calm that might have been satisfaction, or might have been skepticism. Holloway, who accompanied Tucker, couldn't quite read her expression. "So there will be words spoken in a room," she said. "And then what? Will he be punished?" "I don't know," Tucker admitted. "But he'll have to answer for what he did. In public, on record, where it can't be ignored or forgotten. That's more than usually happens. It is a small piece of justice," Dockia said. "Perhaps too small. But it is more than nothing." She looked between the two men. "You kept your word, Marshal Tucker. That is also more than nothing." The hearing took place in early October in Prescott, the territorial capital. It was held in the courthouse, a substantial stone building that represented the territory's aspirations toward permanent, legitimate governance. The room was packed with reporters from Eastern newspapers, military observers, territorial officials, curious citizens, and a small group of Apache witnesses who sat together in the back, their presence drawing stares and whispers. Captain James Morrison was 45 years old, a career cavalry officer with 20 years of service. He wore his uniform with visible pride and approached the witness stand with confident bearing. He was a handsome man, his blonde hair graying at the temples, his posture military straight. The territorial judge, Harold Bennett, was 70 years old and had been adjudicating frontier justice for 3 decades. He had a reputation for fairness tempered with pragmatism. Understanding that perfect justice was rare in the rough circumstances of territorial life, Carlson presented his investigation's findings, methodically building a case that Morrison had acted without proper cause at Red Creek, that he'd manufactured accusations to justify his actions, and that he'd failed to prevent or punish the killing of an unarmed young man. Morrison's defense attorney, a skilled lawyer brought in from San Francisco, countered with testimony about the dangerous nature of the Apache, about ongoing raids on settlements, about the military's obligation to maintain order and enforce reservation boundaries. He produced reports of stolen livestock in the region, suggesting that even if the specific accusations at Red Creek were unproven, the general climate justified aggressive action. The Apache's witnesses testified through a translator, describing the events of that day with quiet dignity. Several broke down when speaking about nature's death, their grief evident even across the language barrier. Morrison's attorney tried to discredit them, suggesting their testimonies were coordinated fabrications, but Judge Bennett shut down that line of questioning. "These witnesses have sworn oaths before this court," Bennett said firmly. "Their testimonies will be given the same weight as any other witness." The hearing lasted 3 days. On the final day, Morrison himself took the stand. Under questioning, he maintained that he'd acted properly, that the Apache at Red Creek had been threatening, that the shooting of Nate was justified self-defense by his soldier. "Captain Morrison," Judge Bennett said, leaning forward in his seat, "were there stolen cattle at Red Creek when you arrived?" "I was acting on reports of stolen cattle, Your Honor. The cattle themselves were not present at the camp, which suggested they had already been moved or sold. So you destroyed food stores and supplies based on an assumption, based on reasonable suspicion and my authority as a military officer, maintaining order in hostile territory." Hostile?" Bennett's voice sharpened. "Were you fired upon? Were your men threatened with weapons?" "The Apache are always a potential threat, Your Honor. Their presence off reservation without authorization, the land at Red Creek, was designated for Apache use in the Treaty of 1875, Bennett interrupted. "I have the treaty here, Captain. I've read it." "That camp was where it was legally allowed to be." Morrison's composure cracked slightly. "Treaties are often disputed, Your Honor. The specifics of boundaries were clear enough that you should have verified before taking aggressive action." Bennett shuffled through papers on his desk. "Captain, I have read soldier testimonies from your own men. 2 of them expressed concern about your orders that day. One wrote to his family describing the incident as troubling. Another said, and I quote, 'We were ordered to intimidate people who'd done nothing wrong.' These are your own soldiers, Captain." The courtroom was silent. Holloway, seated with Tucker in the public gallery, barely breathed. Morrison's face had gone red, but his voice remained controlled. "Soldiers sometimes misunderstand the broader tactical situation, Your Honor. They see one moment without understanding the context, or perhaps they understand better than their commander that what they were ordered to do was wrong." Bennett set down the papers and looked directly at Morrison. "Captain, I'm finding based on this investigation that you acted without proper cause at Red Creek, that you destroyed property and disrupted lives based on unverified accusations, and that you failed to properly control your men, resulting in the death of Nate, an unarmed 16-year-old boy. This conduct falls below the standards expected of an officer and represents a serious abuse of authority. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Morrison's attorney stood to object, but Bennett waved him down. I'm referring this matter to military authorities for court-martial proceedings. Additionally, I am recommending that Captain Morrison be permanently barred from any command position involving interactions with Apache or other indigenous populations. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel's crack echoed through the room. Morrison sat frozen at the witness stand, his confident bearing shattered. His attorney immediately began speaking to him in urgent whispers, likely about appeals and next steps. Tucker and Holloway stood as the judge exited. Around them, the courtroom erupted in conversation, reporters rushing to file stories. Officials conferring in tight groups, spectators arguing about the decision. The Apache witnesses filed out quietly, their faces showing little emotion. But as Dakia passed Tucker and Holloway in the aisle, she stopped briefly. Words became action, she said simply. Stone, not wind. I will share the medicine knowledge with the other settlements now. People should not die for their leaders' crimes. That evening, Tucker and Holloway shared a bottle of whiskey in Tucker's hotel room, too exhausted for celebration, but too keyed up for sleep. It's not finished, Tucker said, staring into his glass. Court-martial could take months. Morrison might get off with a reprimand. His friends in the military might protect him. Maybe, Holloway agreed. But Judge Bennett's words are on record now. The truth is documented. That matters, does it? Tucker sounded tired. Will it change anything for the Apache? Will it prevent the next incident? The next time some officer decides indigenous lives are worth less than cattle or land or pride? Holloway didn't have an answer. He thought about Dakia, about her willingness to save people she had every reason to hate. He thought about the arbitrary nature of who received justice and who didn't, who was believed and who was dismissed. I think, he said slowly, that justice isn't one decision or one hearing. It's 1,000 small choices, day after day. It's Judge Bennett refusing to dismiss Apache testimony. It's you risking your career to investigate a military officer. It's Dakia choosing to heal despite her grief. None of it's enough by itself, but maybe together it adds up to something. Philosophy from a doctor, Tucker said, but there was a slight smile behind his mustache. What about from a medical standpoint? Did we do the right thing, trading justice for medicine? I spent weeks thinking about that, Holloway admitted, about whether it was ethical to make healing conditional on political action. But here's what I realized. She wasn't making healing conditional. She was making education conditional. She gave us enough medicine to save our town immediately, no strings attached. What she traded for was the knowledge to make more, to save others. And what she asked for in exchange was something that should have happened anyway, something that was already owed. She didn't extort justice. She refused to enable injustice being ignored. Tucker considered this, then nodded slowly. That's a fine distinction, maybe, but I think it's an important one. The court-martial proceedings began in November and stretched into early December. Morrison was ultimately found guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer and destruction of property without proper authority. He was not convicted of murder. The military court ruled that the soldier who shot Nate had acted in what he believed was self-defense, and Morrison couldn't be held criminally responsible for his subordinates' actions. The sentence was demotion and forced retirement without full pension. Morrison left the military in disgrace. His career ended. It was something, though not everything Dakia might have hoped for. Holloway visited her camp in late December, bringing a written report of the court-martial's outcome. She read it carefully, with Tucker translating the legal terminology into simpler terms. "He will not command soldiers again?" she asked. "No. That part of his life is over." She nodded slowly. "It is not enough. Nate is still dead. My sister still weeps for her son. But it is more than usually happens when Apache lives are taken. Perhaps it will make the next officer think before he acts. Perhaps it will save the next young man." "I hope so," Holloway said. "I've been documenting everything I've learned from you. The plants, the preparation methods, the medical knowledge. I want to write it up for medical journals, share it with other doctors. But I won't do that without your permission. This is your people's knowledge." Dokia was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the canyon. "Knowledge that saves lives should be shared," she finally said. "But it should be shared with truth. Tell them where it came from. Tell them that Apache healers have kept this knowledge for generations. Tell them that your medicine schools do not hold all wisdom. Can you do that?" "I can," Holloway promised. "I will then share it. Let it save who it can save." Holloway did write his paper, published in the spring of 1884 in a medical journal. He titled it "Indigenous Medical Knowledge and the Treatment of Epidemic Disease: Lessons from the Apache." It described Dokia's medicine in detail, but spent equal time discussing the broader implications, the value of traditional knowledge systems, the need for cross-cultural medical exchange, the ethical obligations of physicians working in frontier territories. The paper generated significant controversy. Some physicians praised it as progressive thinking. Others dismissed it as romanticizing primitive practices. A few suggested Holloway had fabricated the entire account to advance a political agenda. But doctors in frontier territories began seeking out indigenous healers in their regions, asking about plant knowledge and traditional treatments. Some of these exchanges were respectful and genuinely interested in learning. Others were extractive, taking knowledge without acknowledgement or compensation. The pattern was uneven, imperfect, but it represented a small shift in how some in the medical establishment thought about indigenous expertise. In Copper Springs, life gradually returned to normal. The town continued to grow, though perhaps with a bit more humility than before. A small marker was placed in the cemetery, honoring the 63 people who died in the epidemic, and below, their names, an inscription, "Saved by knowledge freely given, by justice sought, by debts acknowledged." Tucker remained marshal for another 12 years before retiring. He became known for his willingness to seriously investigate complaints from Apache communities, and for insisting that his deputies treat indigenous people with the same respect afforded to white settlers. It didn't make him universally popular, but it earned him a reputation for fairness. Holloway continued practicing medicine in Copper Springs until 1891, when he accepted a teaching position at a medical school in Denver. He spent the rest of his career advocating for the inclusion of ethnobotany and traditional medicine studies in medical education. His students found him demanding but inspiring, a man who insisted that healing required both scientific rigor and cultural humility. Dokia lived in her canyon camp for many more years, continuing to serve as a healer for both Apache and, occasionally, white patients who made the journey to seek her help. She died in 1897, in her 70s, surrounded by family. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on her knowledge, some becoming healers themselves, others finding different paths, but carrying the stories forward. The medicine she shared with Holloway saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives across the territory. The outbreak of 1883 was contained and never reached the catastrophic proportions it might have achieved. Other territories, hearing of the treatment, sought similar knowledge from indigenous healers in their regions, and Morrison. He left Arizona Territory entirely, returning to the east where his disgrace was less widely known. He lived out his days in relative obscurity, working as a clerk in his brother's business in Philadelphia. He died in 1904. His obituary making no mention of his military career or the events at Red Creek. The town of Copper Springs still exists today, though the copper mines long ago played, and it's now a small ranching community. The old cemetery holds those markers from 1883, weathered but still readable. Local historians know the story of the epidemic and the Apache healer, though, like many historical accounts, details have been softened and complicated truths simplified over time. But the essential truth remains, preserved in official records and medical journals, in family stories passed down through generations, that knowledge can come from unexpected places, that justice delayed is not always justice denied, that healing and fairness can be linked in ways both profound and practical, and that sometimes the price of survival is acknowledging debts long ignored and wrongs long unaddressed. In the desert canyons northeast of where Copper Springs stands, the medicinal plants that Dockier showed to Holloway still grow, tended by no one and everyone. Their small yellow flowers blooming each spring, silent testimony to knowledge older than the Townsend treaties, older than the conflicts that divided peoples, as enduring as the red rocks themselves.